Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is Fragments of Horror. Now, Fragments of Horror is a collection of horror manga written and illustrated by Junji Ito. Now, for those of you who don't know what a manga is basically a Japanese comic book or graphic novel. Now, the stories collected in here were previously serialized in a magazine between the years 2013 and 2014, and then later on all the stories were put together into this collection. Now, there are 8 stories in here, and in this video I'm going to be reviewing each individual story. So, the first story in here is called Futon, and basically it's about this woman whose husband absolutely refuses to leave his futon, to a point where he's even wearing diapers and she has to change him because he doesn't even want to get up to go to the bathroom. The reason he refuses to leave his futon is because he believes that there are these evil spirits trying to get him. That's all I want to say about the story without giving too much else away, but this story was just okay. I like Junji Ito a lot, but this was not one of his better stories in my opinion, but I will say the strength of this is definitely the artwork, and that's one thing you could say about Junji Ito, is even if the story itself is kind of mediocre, you can almost bet your ass that the artwork is going to be outstanding, because I don't think anybody can say that Junji Ito is not an amazing artist. And this is what the evil spirits look like in the story. It's so insane, but also so Lovecraft-inspired. The second story is called Wooden Spirit, and basically it's about this girl and her father who live in this house that's apparently a historical landmark. And one day this woman comes to the house who's apparently studying architecture at college, and she's so enamored with this house and even calls it sexy. And eventually the father and the woman fall in love with each other and get married, but then one day this girl goes up to one of the rooms only to find her new stepmother naked and basically fucking the room. And basically the house is alive and this woman is starting to have intercourse with the house. It's another case where the artwork is somewhat stronger than the story itself, but it's such a weird and unique story. Like, that's one thing you could definitely say about Junji Ito, is he's always original. Like, something that's almost a guarantee reading a Junji Ito manga is you're gonna find something that you've probably never seen before. The third story in here is called Tomio Red Turtleneck, and basically this one begins where we're introduced to this guy named Tomio, who is walking around wearing a red turtleneck sweater, and he also appears to be holding his head up with his hands. His reason for doing this is because he feels that if he lets go of his head's just gonna come right off. And you find out that a few days prior to the events of the story, he left his girlfriend for a fortune teller, and this fortune teller actually tried to take his head. That's all I want to say about the story itself, but this is a weird one. It is good, but it's really weird, but then again, it's Junji Ito. That kind of comes with the territory. There's also a pretty horrific scene involving a cockroach, but I don't want to give too much else away about that. The fourth, and in my opinion, best story in the collection is Gentle Goodbye, a surprisingly moving and heartbreaking story from Junji Ito. And I almost hesitate to call it a horror story. I mean, it is in a sense, but really it's more of a story about dealing with grief and loss. And compared to Junji Ito's other stories, it's relatively straightforward. Now, the plot of this story is it follows a young woman who ever since she was a child has had a deep-seated fear of her father dying. But she ends up getting married, and her husband's family doesn't seem to like her too much. Like, they're always very cold towards her, but it turns out that her husband's family has a secret. They can basically bring their dead loved ones back to life. Not literally, but basically if they pray hard enough, a recently deceased loved one, they could basically create what they call after images, which are these live-in shades of the people who previously died. But these after images only last X amount of years. As I said, it's probably my favorite story in the collection, but it's not really horrific, it's more just sad and tragic. The fifth story in the collection is Dissection-Chan. Now, some English translations refer to the story as Dissection Girl. Basically, the story begins where during an anatomy class, a bunch of medical students are dissecting cadavers, and one of these corpses appears to actually be alive, and it turns out it is. It turns out it's a girl who snuck in there who seems to have a almost sexual obsession with being dissected. But one of these students recognizes this young woman as somebody that he grew up with, who when they were children was obsessed with dissecting small animals, but now as an adult it appears that obsession has shifted to her being dissected. And throughout the story, the main character becomes obsessed with this girl and is becoming kind of haunted by this girl, whereas he's both terrified of her, but you could tell that he finds something very endearing about her as well. But this was a really good story, and it's pure Junji Ito, but at the same time, there's also something very Clive Barker-esque about this story as well. Like, I could see Clive Barker writing a story like this. The sixth story in the book is called Blackbird, and this is about this bird watcher who's out in the woods, and he comes across this young man who has apparently been out in the woods for days, and both of his legs are broken. He gets this man to a hospital, but we soon learn that this young man, the reason he survived out in the woods for so long is because he was being fed by this bird-like woman. But this woman has been feeding him this strange meat that we soon learn is actually human flesh. But this was a really good and very creepy story, and throughout the story you're not really sure who or what this woman is. You don't know if she's some kind of a demon or yokai or something. But the story also has a weird time travel twist as well. Now, the seventh story in the collection, let's see if I could actually say the name of the story properly. It's Magami Nanakuse. I'm sure I'm not saying that name properly. It's the name of one of the main characters of the story. Basically, the story is about this young woman who's a huge fan of this author, and she wants to be an author herself, and she ends up getting a chance to meet her favorite author, but when she does, this author treats her horribly. But we soon learn that there's something sinister and even supernatural about the town that this author lives in. But this story was pretty interesting. It definitely has sort of a darkly ironic, even EC Comics-esque kind of ending, but you also genuinely feel for the main character because the main character is actually kind of adorable in the beginning, so it makes it all the more sad and tragic what ends up happening to her. Now, the eighth and final story in the collection is Whispering Woman, which is probably my second favorite story in the book. Now, this is definitely a horror story, but it's also a very sad and tragic story as well. The story is about this man whose daughter has this mental condition where basically she can't do anything without being instructed to do so. And if she's not given instructions on what to do, she has severe emotional breakdowns. And several women that this man has hired to take care of his daughter have quit because they just can't take it anymore. But the man hires this one woman to take care of his daughter, and it seems like everything is perfect. Like, this woman is constantly giving his daughter instructions on what to do, and it seems like his daughter's mental state is improving. But as the story goes on, this man starts to notice that there's something kind of off about this woman, and he also notices that her health appears to be declining. That's all I want to say about the story, but this is a really, really good one. As I said, it's probably the second best in the collection. But yeah, Fragments of Horror is a pretty interesting manga collection, and if you're a Junji Ito fan, I would definitely recommend checking this out. Personally, I would recommend his other mangas like Uzumaki and Gaio and even Dissolving Classroom a little bit more than this, but if you are a fan of the man's work, then this is definitely worth a read. Now, I know several of the stories in here were adapted for the anime anthology series Junji Ito, Ito collection. I haven't seen any episodes of that show, so I really can't comment too much on that. Now, before I end this video, I want to cut to a short review on this book done by my friend Christian Feliciano.
I first came across Junji Ito not that long ago, and because this year's been so crazy, I can't really remember how long ago it was, because everything's kind of blending together. I came across him because I was looking for horror comics that would really disturb me and hopefully scare me. Because most of the horror comics I've ever read in my life, they were great, but not many of them ever scared me. Yes, the 1950s horror comics from EC, the shock suspense stories, those really disturbed me because they dealt with real issues. And even ones that weren't gross out horror or anything like that, those would have a message that would disturb me in a way. They would deal with racism, or they would deal with crime or something that would really, shock you, because you were like, oh my God, this is real. And it really got to your core, and it made you think, and it was really smart. But other than that, like the 80s and 70s, even though I love comics like Constantine, Swamp Thing, Sandman, those comics don't really scare me. They're great to read. They're very fun, but they don't actually scare me. And I was looking for something. I said, there gotta be somebody out there who can do that the right way, who can really scare me with a comic book, the way the ones in shock suspense stories did. And so I was looking up a list of horror authors today who are in comics, and Junji Ito's name came up, and I decided to read one of his stories, which is actually in this book, The Whispering Woman. And oh my God, I was infatuated immediately. I love Junji Ito's work. The stories in this book are fantastic. Now, yes, they're not all crazy, gross out, disturbing horror. Some of them take on a more funny tone, and they go deep into psychological horror. You get ghosts, you get different things that, it's a variety of stories, so every story is going to be a little different somehow. It's still true to Junji Ito's work. It's not like he went crazy and decided to do, a love story that was just a plain Nicholas Sparks style love story. No, like, he actually sticks to horror. It's just that it's not as crazy as his other stories. So I think that if you were going to start reading Junji Ito's work, this would be a good place to start, because you get a taste of what to expect in the future. Because in the future, if you read his other stories, those are very powerful. Those are going to stick with you. Those are going to have images that when you're eating, you're going to think about, and then you're going to want to stop eating. Like, those are very, very crazy. And then there's certain phobias I have, and he does deal with them. And the difference between this and something like a movie is that with a movie, you can cover your eyes, you can look away, and you can still hear it, so you kind of know what's going on, you just can't see it. These are comics, so you have to look at the images in order to understand what is going on. So you're forced to face your fears, and that's pretty much me. I'm forced to face them, because there's no way I can look away. If I look away, I can't understand the story, and the stories are so good, I can't look away. Even though I want to, even though I want to put the book down, I can't. I have to keep going. So I think Junji Ito does a great job of doing that, of making you face your fears. And that's great because it engages you. It pulls you into the story. And like I said, even though you want to stop reading, you can't. You got to keep going. And it is worth the read. Every single one of his stories, every single one, is worth the read. I think everybody who's into horror should check it out. Those with a really queasy stomach might want to be careful. Like I said, maybe you could check out this one and see if you like it. And if you do, like I said, then you can kind of graduate to the others. But, if not, hey, that's everything is subjective. But I highly recommend you at least check this out, because Junji Ito deserves as much credit as he can get. And I highly recommend this book to horror fans. I think if you love horror, if you want something new and different, definitely check out this book. And check out Junji Ito. He will surprise you. Whether you love it or you hate it, he's gonna have an effect on you somehow. It's not gonna be some kind of like, this story's bland. No, like, you're gonna have some kind of reaction to it, and a very visceral reaction to it too. So thank you so much. Bye bye.
I hope you enjoyed Christian's take on this book, and I hope you enjoyed this video overall. That was my review on Fragments of Horror by Junji Ito, and bye.